still not using FVA percentage and only measuring MAPE, you are missing out. Let's get to it. Welcome back to IBF On Demand. I'm your value-added host and a little bit under the weather, or at least head stuffy host, Eric Wilson. You can find me at eric@ibf.org. That's eric@ibf.org. Find me on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you get your podcast as well. You can find me there. So find me wherever it is and go ahead and follow me there as well, so we can be just one big happy community. I want to thank another familiar face, Arkiva, driving business transformation by solving what others cannot. Thank you, Arkiva, for being a longtime host and sponsor of this podcast. We have exciting things coming up in April. We actually have a very exciting conference. I'm actually excited about this. I've had some people help put this one together. It's going to be on AI in supply planning, demand planning, S&op, a special conference talking about AI in our field and how it's going to impact us. It's going to be in Scottsdale in April. So if you want to find out exactly what this AI stuff means, agentic AI and large language models, this is the forum for you. There's going to be a lot of great thought leaders from around the world that's going to be there talking about this subject. So check it out at ibf.org. I'm going to be there listening and learning just like you. So check it out, ibf.org, the April conference in Scottsdale about AI in our field. I get it. Some people don't like, or even passionately don't like, mean apes or mean absolute percentage errors. Matter of fact, they do entire podcasts about how horrible they are. It even forced me to do a podcast and talking about how they're not actually that bad. Why? Because they're simple and works for diagnostic KPI. And why research also shows that a weighted MAPE is the most used KPI in business forecasting and demand planning. And there's a reason why it's the most widely used, is because it's easy and it works. Is there better? Absolutely. Does it work? Absolutely. 3 exclamation points. Can we make it better and still keep it super simple? That's why we're here. And I have some help to be able to explain how. Jon Nichols is an Associate Director of Business Planning and Center of Excellence for a large CPG company. He leads efforts to integrate AI and machine learning into forecasting. He aims to develop universal S&op processes. He holds a degree in logistics and international business from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Please help me welcome Jon. So welcome, Jon. I'm excited to see you on the show.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Yep, we had a great town hall webinar last year that had got a lot of views, and I figured, hey, let's have you on and talk about a same subject here with our audience.
Oh, absolutely. It's always a great time talking to you and just interacting with the IBF, so appreciate it.
Great. Well, let's not even start with FVA, though. Better question I want to actually start you with is, why do we even measure forecast error at all? I mean, we're never right. Why do we even measure forecast error?
Yeah. So for me, it's all about being able to drive continuous improvement, really understanding, hey, where are we, where can we improve in our process? Where are the errors? What's happening that needs improvement? Because as you know, supply chain is very long and complex. And demand planning really can only see kind of that upstream impact, but there's a huge downstream impact that demand planning sometimes is a blind spot or doesn't really understand. So, if your forecast error is off, especially if you're talking at a lower level, such as your distribution center sites and all that, that can cause a lot of issues downstream, a lot of additional costs, having to deploy or redeploy product across your network. It could ultimately leave in service impacts as well, which could ultimately leave in fines. So it's really important to understand where you can improve, and kind of the detail of that, because there's a lot of costs that are associated with incorrect error in your demand plan.
So it sounds like forecast error, or at least identifying it, is going to save you money then, in essence, is what it's doing.
It should, yes.
Well, good. Well, then the next question, getting to FVA percentage or forecast value add, how does it going to help then as another KPI? I mean, I have enough KPIs. Do I really need one more?
Yeah, it's funny. The way that I like to explain it is really forecast accuracy is your scorecard, your metric, or your MAPE, or your weighted MAPE, where forecast value add is really like the X-ray of your process, really understanding what's, getting in there, understanding what's improving my forecast and what is actually hurting it. So it's all about measuring and evaluating your process, really the effectiveness of your process and each step within your process, and also each participant. Are they hurting or are they helping your forecast? And quite honestly, a lot of the times people find that the more humans touch your forecast, the worse the forecast accuracy is.
So it actually is going to help us then, any input or any type of process, you're saying it can actually identify better or worse than the prior input or prior process step is what you're looking at?
Yep. Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to measure it. Kind of the traditional way that...
Let's just start, how do we measure it, what exactly it is?
Yeah, let's do that. So what exactly it is it's a metric to use to evaluate the effectiveness of your process. And it can be either each step or each participant in your forecasting process. So one of the ways that I've used it in the past is really to evaluate the different methods of forecasting and how they're helping your forecast or hurting. So the way that I talked about it in the IBF webcast about a year ago was, we start with our naive forecast, and think of naive as really your very basic level of forecast. There's really no math behind it. There's really no human having to think at all. You really just take your last year period actuals and use that for this year's forecast. So in this example, let's say it's February right now. You would take last year's February actuals and assume you would do the same volume this year in February. So that's kind of your naive forecast. No math, simplest way to do it. Then you look at if you're using a statistical model or a machine learning model, you look at what is the accuracy of my statistical forecast alone. No human input, just my statistical alone. So the idea behind that is your first step is your naive forecast, very basic. Your second step is your statistical forecast. So then you can compare, is my statistical forecast better than my naive? It should be on a consistent basis. Otherwise, why are you doing a statistical forecast, right? You could just use your naive. The third step on this is what I kind of like to call your final forecast. That is your statistical forecast plus any adjustments or enhancements to the forecast that a human would do. So in this example, you go from statistical forecast accuracy over to your final forecast accuracy with your human input. And the idea behind there is, if the human is adding inputs into the statistical forecast, the hope is that it's adding value. You look at the forecast accuracy after that. But a lot of times, like I just mentioned, we find that the human actually can hurt the value of your forecast that way.
Okay. So what you're comparing then would be like a weighted MAPE versus weighted MAPE. So what would be the weighted MAPE of your naive and a weighted MAPE of your statistical and a weighted MAPE of your consensus forecast at the end? So you're actually just comparing one error metric to the same error metric at a different every different part of the process.
Yep, absolutely. And you can do, I've also done bias as well, forecast bias as well in that, because when you're really talking to that leadership, that executive level, a lot of times they're more concerned about your total forecast bias or your error in your total at the total level. So you can measure it. The way that I've used it in the past is measure it at a weighted MAPE or a MAPE level, as well as kind of that forecast bias, that higher level as well.
So if you're doing it as a bias, then when you have either pluses or minuses, and then you're doing basic arithmetic here, one minus the other to get your forecast value add, would you have to convert that into an absolute then?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I figured. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Absolutely. And the other method to do this is also looking at the steps in the process. Now that requires a little bit more of like tracking where you are. But if you're in a 5-step process, let's say, or 4 or 5-step s&op traditional process, you can look at what was your forecast at that time or at that specific meeting. And you can track that through the entire process to say, okay, my step 1, our forecast was here. My step 2, my forecast was there. All the way up to step 4 or 5, we get to the executive, and they actually may make the forecast worse, or they could make it better, right? So there's another way to do that, but it does require a little bit more rigor to make sure you're capturing what your forecast was at each step.
Yeah, Heinz actually, before it was Kraft, now whatever it is, but way back when it was Heinz in 2005 or whatever, they actually modeled like 11 steps in their process and measured FVA at each one of those steps to find out which ones they could eliminate to streamline the process. So yeah, it's a great use case for it then as well. So couple things then I want to touch on. Then you mentioned you're naive, a simple, seasonal random walk. What happened last year, we're going to measure that as what's going to happen this year. So my last year's February is this year's February, forecast. And then you said measure versus your statistical. That's, you're going to, statistical you would assume would be better than a naive, wouldn't it?
You would assume. I've had instances actually recently where my naive has been better, actually for a seasonal item. And actually, it was better in the off season, which was interesting, which actually makes a little bit more sense because the demand is fairly stable. So during that off season, the naive was better than the statistical, maybe because the statistical was picking up, depending on the model you had, maybe it was picking up a little bit more of the season that you wouldn't want. But I have seen instances, especially in seasonal items, where the naive is quite better than the statistical.
Okay. Well, the other thing I've seen too is like when you take a naive and you have a good statistical model that does have picking up some seasonality and trend, or some things that you couldn't pick up in a naive model, that you may see a forecast value add of like 20-30%. What's that number mean? If you have a 5% forecast value add or a 30% forecast value add, what exactly do those numbers mean? How do you utilize those numbers to figure out if I'm doing exponentially better or just I'm doing okay?
Yeah. So, in this example, let's say your naive was 70% and your statistical was 75. So you can say that, hey, we're adding 5 percentage points of value to that accuracy.
Is that
you
good?
Really got to take it? So that's where the benchmarking comes into play, right? So you really got to look at your benchmarks. IBF has plenty of them as well to see kind of where your peers are at, because honestly, there's a point of diminishing returns, right? In the past where I've worked on this, it's been like, hey, let's, we may have a total overall bias problem, but our forecast accuracy or our weighted MAPE or MAPE is good. So we may not really want to focus too much on those details and accuracy, more on like high level. We have a bias in our forecast, so we need to adjust. But I've used definitely the IBF's benchmarking in order to understand, hey, is that percentage good or not? And is it worth it? Because again, there is the point of diminishing returns. You just don't want to be chasing something that really doesn't have too much incremental value.
All right. So you mentioned the town hall. I mentioned the town. We both, I think, mentioned the town hall you did or webinar you did last year. So go back to ibf.org if you want to watch it. It was actually the most watched webinar or town hall we did in 2025. So check it out. But you laid out in that very well the FVA process. You talked about something like analyze, measure, and optimize, I believe were the three different parts of it. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that, or what exactly were those three parts of an FVA process?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step is all about the first step within that 3-step framework is analyze your steps. So really you need to understand your process before you even begin. And hopefully you do. Hopefully you have a process, but really understand what is our process as a whole, who is involved in each step, who has the decision rights in each step, who is making adjustments and changes in each step. And you want to document that. So you really want to understand and ensure everyone else that's involved within your s&op process understands all of your steps within your s&op process first. Then you want to look at what is our baseline we're going to measure to. What is our naive forecast? Is the baseline going to be a naive forecast? And if it's a naive forecast, what is the time horizon? So in this example, it would say, okay, we're looking at a naive forecast, and we're going to use year ago during that specific month. So year ago, February 2025. That's going to be kind of our baseline comparison. Then we're also going to measure what is my statistical forecast as a kind of another comparison point. And then we're going to look at the final step within it, which is going to be your final forecast with any adjustments on top of your statistical. So you really want to look at that, and that's part of kind of the analyze the steps within your process. Then we go to measure impact. So that's really deciding what actual metrics do we want to use for this FVA calculation. So we have been talking about weighted MAPE or MAPE, and then even bias. Do we want to measure, a couple different metrics within our FVA realm? So you start measuring it. Then you want to evaluate the final forecast versus your statistical forecast and evaluate, hey, what are the adjustments that are being made? And you're going to really start to track the performance month over month. Excel, Power BI, really anything that's basic. You just want to start tracking it. Then all about understanding where are the issues at and how do we correct them. And that's when you get into the optimized process phase. So that's really about understanding where are you seeing those trends. Is there a certain step within the process where, hey, maybe when we get to the executive level meeting, they are adding in adjustments and they may not be as close to the forecast as the teams that are in it day to day. And that may be hurting or helping our forecast. If it's hurting, we may want to let those executives know that, right? And you're looking at areas to add value or areas on where you're hurting or helping. And you're really just looking to eliminate those steps where you're hurting value. So, a use case that I've seen here is in tracking this, we found that, hey, there's actually certain brands that the statistical does good enough. And we're happy with those results. So we're just going to let the model forecast for us, and we're not going to touch it. It's going to be touchless. We're going to check in on it every month to see if everything is working, but we're not going to do any adjustments. And that's the true unlock. That's all about optimizing, figuring out where you're hurting, helping, and what you can do next in order to free up time to more value-added activities.
Makes sense. So we're going to improve the forecast using it. We're going to eliminate some maybe biases, some steps or inputs that aren't adding value, including executives sometimes. But then you're also going to make things more efficient. So I like this. So real quick then, was there anything when you went through this process, because you've done it a few times now, that really surprised you when looking at an FVA, measuring FVA, that when you went through it and it was an aha moment for you?
Yeah, I think the first one we already kind of touched on was the power of your naive forecast, right? Like we put so much emphasis as demand planners on really trying to bring the newest math or the newest methods, the new statistical methods on how to improve your forecast. And the funny thing is, if you just were to use last year's actuals, you'd be as accurate or maybe just good enough, right? Like maybe we don't need to be that much more because maybe it requires a lot more resources, which require a lot more money and time. And maybe we don't want to do that. So really definitely like taking a step back and looking at your process in that lens of, hey, maybe my naive is just good enough. The second one is, as I mentioned, the more time you touch it, the more times you sometimes more often you actually hurt the forecast value add than not. But I think that those two things are probably my biggest takeaways from it. And of course, you kind of look into the different customers and the different levels, and you find different key takeaways of certain customers behave a certain way, or maybe like, hey, this customer model is doing very well and this one's not, so maybe we should shift our time. But to me, it's all about kind of just the learning is learning where your process is working, where your tools and your systems are working well, and where you can shift resources and time to the ones that really need the help.
Yeah. The naive forecast, that just isn't sexy. I mean, you want the sexy AI models. You don't want the naive. Yep. Come on. So, alrighty. So what would be some common mistakes or pitfalls people generally do when starting an FVA process?
Yeah. I think one of the first things the pitfalls that you need to really focus in on is to ensure that your teams, whether it be your managers, whether it be the people involved in the process up to your executive team, really they understand what the metric is and what you're looking for, and really quantify like what's good enough, right? I keep on going back to this idea of what's good enough, but I've noticed like outside of the IBP or the s&op community that people may not understand like what good results are. And that's the importance of benchmarking, right? That's why we benchmark with other companies, because if someone's expectations are, hey, I want, 95% forecast accuracy at the UPC level, and you should be able to do that. In theory, if someone's not in this industry, they may think that's achievable, right? But someone like you and I, or someone that's been in the industry for a while, it's like, hey, upper 70s is like the benchmark that we see in certain industries, and anything beyond that, really, you're not going to get there, and you shouldn't waste your time getting there. So it's all about kind of just understanding what you're measuring and setting those expectations out. It's closely tied to weighted MAPE and MAPE. So, in bias, you got to have people understand that. But then it's really just about understanding the metrics and what is good enough and what you are chasing so that you can inform them and shift your resources and time into more value-added activities. But I think that's kind of the main pitfall, is really just understanding what the metric is and how you can work with people to improve it.
All righty. Well, I think that's a great way to end it, with people giving people encouragement of, hey, there you can do it. Avoid the pitfalls. Find out, some neat surprises along the way as well. So I like what you're talking about. Close enough a lot of times is good enough. I think that's a good message to take away from this as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, definitely appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you being part of this, and I'm sure we're going to see you at a conference in the future, and I really appreciate the insights you provided today.
Well, thank you, Eric. Yeah, looking forward to seeing you all soon at the next conference, and just continue to partner with you all and partner with peers and really, continue to move the industry forward. So thank you for taking the time to have me on your podcast.
All right. Thank you, Jon.
All right. Take care, Eric.
That was a great interview. I knew it would be. He did great last year in the webinar town hall. Knew he would do good on this podcast as well. The reason I wanted to share the information with you, I want to give you a little bit of history about FVA. Mike Gillian introduced the concept back in 2002, before John was even most likely born. Showing my age, I was one of the first ones to adopt the KPI and provide a use case for it in 2005 at an IBF conference in Scottsdale, Arizona by chance. That, along with some other case studies, especially ones from Heinz Ketchup, before it was Kraft and now it was Kraft and then it was Kraft, whoever it is now. Way back when it used to be Heinz, there's a great case study there about their use of FVA as well. I've actually done 3 podcasts on this subject. One was a fantastic, I'm not saying this one wasn't fantastic. This one's great as well, so I'm glad you're watching. But I did another great one with Sarah Park, who, prior to her time now at Coca-Cola, was with Heinz during the FVA implementation and case study as well. And we talk about that in her podcast. I talk about another one about my case study with Temper Sealy and the use cases we did there as well. So there's some great podcasts beyond just this on FVA if you didn't get enough here. I'm obviously very passionate about this topic and others as well. I'm weird that way. I'm passionate about this stuff. And don't get me started on cultural complexities in global businesses. I just won't shut up then if you start getting me on that one. But briefly explaining the concept of forecast value add, FVA, it's a metric that measures whether each step or input into a process improves the accuracy compared to the prior step or input. FVA answers a basic question, if done right, and what you can tell from the podcast today, are we adding value or are we making things worse by what we're doing? Done. It's a simple calculation. If done well, is powerful insights. If you're not using it, start. Done. That's all you need to do. Well, that's a wrap. Now you have me thinking about cultural global business processes. It's all your fault. So most likely, you're probably going to see a future podcast about that. I'm going to go clear my head, literally trying to see if I can get this stuff out of my head and drainage and be able to talk right in future podcast. My name is Eric. You can find me at eric@ibf.org. That's eric@ibf.org. Thanks to Arkiva for driving business transformation by solving what others cannot. I said my first conference was over 20 years ago now at Scottsdale, Arizona as an IBF conference. Guess what? Your first conference can be in Scottsdale this year. We're going to have a great AI conference in our field, AI in supply planning, demand planning, s&op, with speakers from around the globe talking about use cases. We're going to be talking about how to utilize it, myths that may be involved with it. It's a great conference in Scottsdale in April. Check it out at ibf.org. And remember, as always, in closing, don't forget, wash your hands.